Jesse, thank you for coming on the podcast. And I want to just break the third wall here for a second for the listener and be transparent that we took a minute of time to just be present. And I love that. So I want to ask about that. Why do you do that? And when did you start doing practices like that?
Yeah. I mean, we could talk about we could go down a really far rat hole here, but I started doing coaching in 2017, and one of the many lessons of becoming more self-aware. It's not just about self-awareness broadly, where 2 days later you look back and go, "Oh yeah, man, I wasn't at my best then. I wasn't a jerk," but really developing that self-awareness in the moment, and getting present in the moment and knowing when you're not present. And so that's something I've been cultivating for, I guess, 4 years now. And, I was running a little bit late to the call, as you know, and that's kind of a sign to me. It's almost like a hack. I'm like, oh, I know I'm not present because I was rushing off something else to get onto this call. And, the concept of being present, when you're not present, you're oftentimes reacting in a state of threat. So there's something you feel like is impacting, oh, I was late. Oh my God, Danny upset with me. Am I, and being present, there's just you realizing there's no real threats. And one of the most, again, another hack is like just box breathing for a minute, kind of 4 seconds in, holding for 4 seconds, 4 seconds out, which my coach taught me as a way of getting present. But the crazy thing is it actually affects your blood chemistry. And that's actually what's happening is when you're in a state of threat, there's a little bit of adrenaline that comes in your blood, which is a natural survival habit. And this is a really fun, open learning conversation where I don't need that survival instinct in this moment. But if I didn't take time to switch my blood chemistry, then I might forget to say the thing I want to say. I might respond, be too reactive in the conversation, whatever it might be. I wouldn't be who I want to be and being present. And so that's sort of a long answer to a short question. But yeah, I've been doing it for several years. And I'm not perfect. Nobody is, but in the moments where I really know I'm not present and I would like to be present, I do that.
What's the biggest difference between Jesse from 2016 and Jesse today?
Oh man, feels like a whole podcast topic. What is the biggest difference? It might just be that. It might be what you just witnessed. It might be the ability to know when I'm feeling threat or when I'm constricted or I'm not open, and to be able to actually stop myself in the moment to make that switch. I mean, in a nutshell, I think I'm better at communicating than I was then. Maybe a higher level version is like I think I spent most of my time operating out of fear prior, in 2016 and prior, and now I spend significantly less time operating out of fear. I mean, I still spend a lot of time operating out of fear, but a lot more time in my genius and things that I think learning mode and being open, wanting to help people, just things that are not about fear.
Yeah, you bring up genius mode, and I remember looking at your profile, looking at you when you brought up Gay Hendricks, and I said, wow, this is interesting. He's an entrepreneur, but he's also interested in conscious living and conscious leadership. And I was like, this is such a fascinating topic to explore. And I just want to learn about the early days of getting to know conscious leadership and why you decided to go in the first place down that direction. And then take us through that journey if you could.
Yeah, I'd love to. I started a business in 2010. And I grew up in a pretty traditional immigrant, first generation household. My dad, he moved over from India when he was 17 with $1 in his pocket. He worked his ass off his whole life. He provided amazingly well for us, gave us every advantage we could ever ask for, not the least of which was just being born in this country. But then, middle class plus upbringing. He was always an entrepreneur and learned a lot from him around the way he operated. And I'd say a lot of it was like operating to survive and operating to kind of make it happen, and that being kind of the core foundation. I think especially for Indian Americans with immigrants, there's just certain values. You work really hard. You're constantly trying to push yourself to the next level. The joke in the Indian culture is like if you get a 97 on a test, your parent asks you, well, what happened to the other 3 points? And so I think that was sort of the way I was raised, and it led me to great achievements. I got into great university, and worked at very fancy companies, and ran Ampush for the first 5 or 6 years, and we ran hard, and we had a lot of success, and at some point we felt like by 2014, let's say we started in 2010, by 2014 we were like, we're not having that much fun, we're not really enjoying this, we just want to be done with it. And it was sort of like the classic entrepreneur thing of like, wait a second, your dream is a nightmare. And we were like, that's strange. And in 2015, we had a partial exit of the business. My daughter was born in April of 2017. And, we thought we were going to partially exit the business and sell the rest of it. And that started to become less likely. And I kind of just found myself in this rut, and I wasn't like depressed or anything like that, but I would wake up in the morning, cancel my morning meetings, show up to work at 11, leave at 3. Like, I just didn't really want to be there. My wife was like, the first time she's ever seen me this way for several months. And the company that invested in us is this awesome business called Red Ventures, and the CEO and founder there is a guy named Rick Elias. And he's famous for one of many things, but one of them was he was in that Sully flight. He was in the flight that landed in the Hudson.
Wow.
And he has a TED talk about it. And so he's had his moment. He talks very like, he almost died. He thought he was going to die, and it really changed his life in many different ways. He's very present. There's a lot of things, a lot of work he's done too. And him and I have a great relationship. And I called him one day and I said, I feel stuck, and I don't know what to do, don't know where to go. And he, in a very older brother, uncle-ish kind of way, he sort of said, he said, you're a lucky MFer. Like, and he started saying, you have 2 beautiful children. You've made more money than 99% of people your age. You run your own business. And he really started kind of giving me that perspective. But the takeaway from it was there's probably some inner work to be done that you're missing, that you're not seeing that. And he really encouraged me to get coaching. He said, go hire a coach, talk to them about your things, and see what you learn. And there's probably a lot of, and he also, the other thing he encouraged me to do, to his credit, was make Ampush the purpose of it is literally your personal growth and development, and encourage your employees to do the same. Like, really hone that as a calling card. That's what you're doing every day. So we went and hired a coach. I still work with him. His name's Dave Cashin. He's like, into the conscious leadership stuff. And I'd say that the first big aha moment was probably in the first week or 2 of doing it. And he started explaining the 5 types of motivators to us, that the conscious leadership group talks about. And these are all, I think all of them are different-ish paths to generally the same thing, including religion and other stuff. And he said, there's fear, there's extrinsic, there's intrinsic, there's play genius, and then there's like empathy or love. And the fear is obvious. Extrinsic is like money and titles and status. Intrinsic is kind of beating your own score. Play genius is just sort of like you have fun doing it, so you want to do more of it. And then empathy, love. That one's, people get confused sometimes. Like, the way I think about it is, typically a passionate restaurateur is not actually passionate about food, although they may be a great chef, but they're truly passionate about the human experience of breaking bread and tasting delicious. So it's like, it's the human experience that motivates. Like Steve Jobs, I don't think he was actually that passionate about technology or like computers. He was very passionate about the human experience of interacting with that device and what it could do for your life. And so he's like, oh, those are the 5. And fear is very effective. It's not bad or good. It's highly effective. If I put a gun to your head, you'll run as fast as you've ever run. But it's non-renewable, because once you stop feeling the fear, you have to either create more fear for yourself or find, you have to find something else to tap into. It also tends to leave a negative residue on you and others around you. And then all the way up, through the thing is like, doing something to the human experience tends to be very renewable and very powerful. So does genius. Like, when you're just doing the things that you love, that tends to be really, and that I'd never heard that at that point. And he was like, I have like bad news. You guys have basically been motivating yourself with fear all this time, and now you've actually had some success, and you're kind of lost because you no longer making, that's no longer the thing that works for you anymore. And I remember also thinking at that time, like, all these different answers. Like maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I don't like marketing and customer acquisition. Like maybe Facebook is not, I had all these answers for what it might not be, but I didn't have this answer of, no, maybe I'd just been using fear for a long time and I'd done well and, had a partial exit and it didn't satisfy me quite the way it would. So that was sort of the beginning of the journey for me, which was around 2017. And then obviously could talk much more about a bunch of different things, but that was kind of the story for what led me to then asking the question of what else could motivate me, what else is there, and that's been kind of quite a life journey for me.
If I'm correct, you still were working on Ampush for another 3 years after that, or maybe you still work today on Ampush?
I still do, yeah.
Yeah, so how do you take something that was once fear-based and continue to do it, but move up the scale?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the interesting things about that scale is that when people first hear it, they think of it as a broad generalization. Oh, I'm fear motivated. Oh no, I'm intrinsic motivated. And the truth is, we use all 5 of those every day, and every minute or every hour, right? And that's part of the idea of getting present. And so part of it is like just noticing when you're what. And that was like, I was joking for the first year. People talk to me about coaching. I said for the first year, my coach was like Mr. Miyagi. Like he was just like, just notice, just start noticing. Like there was far less specific work or tasks. It was just like, notice when are you feeling, when does your chest get tight? When do your shoulders get tight? When do you feel light and effervescent? And start trying to correlate those different things. Because the truth was we were using all 5 of those things every day. And and so that's part of the answer. The second part of the answer is another paradigm from the CLG guys, which is context versus content, right? And so content is Facebook ads or healthcare startup or nonprofit. It's the what happens. The context is from where are you doing that? And the craziest thing about all this work is that you can do it. You can do anything. You can run a cancer curing startup from a place of fear and wanting status and money. You can also run the cancer from a place of wanting to cure patients for cancer. And by the way, in the same day, you could do them for different contexts. It could be different contexts. So a lot of it was thinking about what I truly enjoyed about running a business and building a business, and what my sort of like zones of genius and what I really loved. And that took a year plus of sort of deconstructing, and then reframing the work I did through that lens. And I can talk more about that. But the crazy thing was I had a lot of people who worked with me before and after this, and one of the telling pieces of feedback they would give me is it's funny, Jesse, you don't say anything different. You're just as deep into the numbers and as rigorous as you've ever been, and you have high expectations for us. All the things are the same, but I feel so different when I talk to you now. And it was like my head was exploding, because it was like I was just relating to the same set of numbers and problems in business from just a different position and a different context. And so I think I was very skeptical of this concept, by the way. I should say that for the first year of understanding it, I was like, this is bullshit. Like, no, it's like if I was working on a problem more exciting, I'd be more excited. And I really was like, what are you talking about? And now I'm like very much a true believer in it, because I've sort of experienced it.
Dude, I have tears in my eyes, because there's a sense of lightness that I heard on hearing you in Patrick O'Shaughnessy's podcast. I was like, wow, this guy's full of light and full of love. And there's a sense of lightness I feel in this moment from hearing you speak. And I'm sure people listening, if they really feel it inside their body, they will feel that from hearing you speak right now. And it's real. And how did you get over that hump? Or what would you recommend to somebody who is like, wow, that sounds kind of interesting, but I don't know if I'm ready to do something like that myself?
Yeah. I think one thing is and as I've learned this stuff, I've made a pretty classic mistake, which is like, it's so life changing that I've like, oh, my brothers and this
Proselytize.
and one of the yeah, totally. And one of the big lessons obviously is that there has to be an openness to it and a desire for it before it can turn into otherwise like in many ways it's the opposite. It's very off-putting, and I still make that mistake. I don't. I think like the stuff that Dave did that was really effective for me was the little stuff. And I think once I started believing the little stuff, then I started believing the bigger stuff, if that kind of makes sense. So
Like
like,
what?
yeah, I'll give you a couple examples. Like, one was, I'd say, I want to be more compassionate in a meeting. I want to just show up and be more empathetic. I'm not an empathetic person, right? I wasn't raised with empathy. And of course, Dave will first correct me and say, well, up until now, yeah, so you're not just categorizing yourself as something, which I've now do, I think that's very true. It's very limiting to say, I'm not, up until now, I would like to be more empathetic in a meeting. And, that seems like, oh my God, that's a huge task. And he said, when you believe in the context versus content and the willingness, he had me like write down, three things on index cards: be empathetic, be inspirational on a different one, and um, be learning oriented. I'm making those up. And he's like, just keep them in your back pocket. Before the meeting, just look at that word, just like that little second of intention setting to being that thing, and then see how you show up and see if you feel like and that was very effective. There's this little piece of intentionality, and I was like, oh wow. So I think there was something like that became very. That's a small example. Like, box press, just breathing before a meeting and getting present and realizing you're showing up in different ways. So there's a bunch of these little behavioral shifts that I think is probably where I'd tell people to start. Another one that I recommend that I really enjoy is like, some sort of morning 2-3 minute journal, a few things you're grateful for, like that sort of stuff. Just, it really started to have compounding effects on me over time. So those tend to be like the smaller things that um, I usually recommend folks to start with. Because if you believe that you can do the same thing from a different context and you actually experience it, then it becomes a much easier sell.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, if I ran a meeting, our numbers are down, the old Jesse, the 2016 Jesse, like without knowing it unconsciously, is freaked the fuck out. Right. I'm scared. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm scared. I'm like this. And I'm like, why, what were the numbers there? And how does that break down? And what goes on? And again, like, and then, the new Jesse is like, well, hold on. This is a really great opportunity to teach Danny something and make him a better business person. That's how I'm going to relate to this problem now. By the way, the questions are exactly the same. How do you break down that number? What do we think about this? But again, the way I showed up was so different in those things. And so you start to see that. We started to see organizational culture things happening, scores improving, just like it became a good and positive, meaningful feedback loop for us.
You talk about professionally how it's transformative. What about personally? What are those closest to you? What were they saying while New Jesse was coming about?
When they weren't irritated with me for trying to tell them they should also get coaching and stuff. Um, yeah, I think my wife, I mean, it really had a big impact on my marriage and my parenting. Um, and in so many different ways, I think like I mean, one simple thing in my marriage is like, I realize, and I'm far from perfect, but like how oftentimes I was not present with my wife, and not in not in on my phone way even. Like, I think that's what people typically mean not present is like, oh, you're on your phone, but I think of it now obviously as just like, am I there with her, fully kind of taking in the moment of that stuff? And I think therefore, how do I respond to her? How do I react? All those different things. I think that's one. Another really strong example that kind of comes from the conscious leadership stuff is one of the, I think, sixth or seventh is like having clear agreements. And so this one really, kind of changed my marriage. And what I realized after going through this, I was like, wow, we never have any clear agreements with each other, right? And like the story I always tell about this was like, my son was pretty young, and it was like Friday, it was a day like take today Friday, and we were going on a date night, and I came home, and I started doing conscious leadership stuff, so I was just in the beginning parts of it, so I knew a little bit. And my wife was like, hey, I was like, okay, cool. What's up? And she's like, oh, the babysitter's coming at 8 o'clock today. And our son usually sleeps at 8:30. So I get home at like 7:30, and I go hang out with our son, and, babysitter shows up at 8 o'clock. She pops her head in, she goes, oh, babysitter's here. I'm like, okay, cool. Playing with my son, play with him till like 8:20. 8:25 or something like that. And we had a reservation at 8:30, but it's 10 minutes away. So I was like, get in the car around 8:20. I'm like, we're perfectly on time. And she's pissed. And I'm like, what happened? Like, what's up? She's like, I told you the babysitter was 8 o'clock. And I was like, that's cool. Like, I didn't know that like that meant that you wanted to leave at 8, like whatever, she was hungry or whatever it was, right? But it was a tiny little example where like, I'm not hyper intuitive, or I have up until now I haven't been hyper intuitive as a person, and realized she meant something different. And it became a tiff, and it wasn't a huge tiff or anything, but like it was a tiff. She was annoyed, she was frustrated because she was hungry, and she thought she was saying to me we were leaving at 8 o'clock, and I did not hear that, and it was 8:20, so we were leaving 20 minutes later than she thought she had told me. And so like, of course she's upset about that. Why wouldn't you be, right? If it's just like totally flippantly been disregarded for 20 minutes when you're hungry, right? That's the feeling, that's the story, right, that she had told herself. And so we just got really good at saying, what do you want me to do by when, like what needs to get done by when, and being really clear about it, and then like trying to be more in integrity with each other around the promises that we have made to each other, what will get done by when. And it's made us more alive. Like, it's just our marriage, it's improved a lot of things, and it's easy to tell, by the way, when we get out of that every time. So if I'm getting busy with stuff or vice versa, we can both kind of sense that from each other. So it's had a pretty profound personal impact on, the other big one that's just related to the marriage stuff is like just listening. Like, I realized, man, I was a terrible listener, because I grew up, like, I did speech and debate in high school. I grew up in a household where you were just debating and arguing all the time, and not in a mean way, just like that was the way we communicated with each other. And for her, that was, she would tell me a problem, she would tell me something going on, and I was like, point number one, do this. Point number two, do this. And like, she never felt heard, obviously, and just learning how to sit down, listen, reflect a little bit of that back to her. That was like another huge personal change. And then on the kids side, like we started getting into the conscious parenting thing, which is interesting. And one of the funniest, most interesting things, like I don't know how much you've studied or if you have kids, Danny, but they say, obviously the general learning and the framing is that kids, you're there to raise your kids. You're there to improve them and help them grow. That's your job as a parent. And the conscious parenting, like it does with lots of things, it flips that paradigm and says, what if your kids are here to teach you that there's all these parts of you that haven't grown and haven't healed? And it's not easy always to relate to it that way. And by the way, it doesn't mean you don't also raise your kids. It just means that there's interesting data and information to learn about yourself. And I've used that in a really, really powerful way to kind of, notice when something really triggers me, or notice when what types of things upset me and why, and then actually go in and go, why does that bother me so much? What's going on there? Like, why? And it's actually funny if you notice it if you're thinking this way, because totally different things trigger me than trigger my wife. Like, she gets really triggered by loudness in our house. I do not, doesn't bother me one bit. So if the kids are loud, that doesn't matter to me. If the kids are, but it really bothers her. So there's something there for her, right? And in my case, like, I get really triggered if the kids like give up on something. She doesn't really notice, right? Like, it's like, what's going on with me that I have such a weird reaction to that, or I have such a reaction to that. So it's definitely flown into all aspects.
You mentioned with you notice, or you're doing a better job at noticing when you fall away from being present. What are the signs that you see when you are not being present?
Yeah. It's like, it's become like a Happy Meal-ish of sorts. I mean, one for me is definitely I become my time, today's a good example. Like, I tend to be less on time. I just like, I start running 10 minutes late pretty regularly, 10, 15, 20, getting home late. One obvious like telltale sign, if you do this stuff long enough, is like anytime you're blaming someone, the situation, yourself, like it's just a telltale sign that you've fallen out of sort of being present, and you're just like trying to find reasons for why things are happening instead of just doing it inwards. For my wife and I, it's like our connection becomes, it's just very clear. We're just like, we're less affectionate with each other. We're just like we're not talking as much, or our talking all becomes procedural, like, oh, when are you picking up this person? There's just nothing, there's no banter, there's no discussion. So there's like very, again, very specific signs. And again, interestingly enough, like when you just do the behaviors, typically it can snap you out of it.
Yeah.
If we just like promise or make a commitment to hug each other every day and embrace really for like a minute, or not even a minute, 20 seconds, like that can make all this, you stop, the blame doesn't matter anymore. None of it, you're just like, okay, we're here, we're good.
Yeah, it's so crazy how quick you can really snap out of it, and how quick we snapped out of it when you were late. It was just like we're back in the present moment then, because you took that time, which is such a beautiful thing. I'd love to go to your why and when you discovered your why, which you've said is to help others grow / be their best selves through entrepreneurial business. When did you discover that along your journey?
Yeah, it was probably a couple years in. I can remember exactly where I was, which is interesting. I was like in my little office in San Francisco in the back of our building, and I had made this like lounge thing. So I didn't actually have an office. I have a conference room and a lounge because I didn't, the desk. I just had the conference room, and I was sitting on the chairs there, and the the thing that really made it click for me was there was a few really profound things that came through, and mostly stuff from Dave. One thing he mentioned, which I tell a lot of people now, is oftentimes, unsurprisingly, as humans, we make purpose. We basically like, we go below the line. We have like, we make finding purpose a threatening experience because we say like, what is my purpose? Oh, I need a purpose. I must have a purpose. Why don't I have a purpose? Like, and one day I'm gonna cure polio like Bill Gates, and like, okay, now I'm gonna earn a lot of money to go do that. Like, we make it another thing that we have to go get and another brass ring, and then we generally relate to it from a fear-based place. We don't relate to it from a and his point was like, whatever your purpose is, it's actually a form of being. It's just being who you are, and so like your purpose is not a thing you go get. It's already with you. And then, so that was the first kind of part of it. The second part of it was, by the way, you probably demonstrate your purpose on a regular basis, and you probably live it in different ways that come up all the time. You just haven't kind of put your finger on it just yet. And so then any question he asked me, which was really powerful, was like, what's the one thing you can't not do?
So
So
good.
what just shows up when you show up? What's like the stench you bring into the room? Like, you walk in, and it's kind of an exercise. We ended up doing it with our leadership team too, but it's like, what's the one thing you can't not do? And the exercise is that you write that down, and then you kind of just like hold it near you, and you check it every few weeks, and you go, does this feel right? Or does this, and sometimes people do it, and it may take them 6 months of repeating that exercise a few times to find it. In my case, I sort of thought about it. And I'd gotten feedback through the years in the business, like, man, when Jesse's in the room, like, you want to sit up straighter, you want to be on your A game, like, he really helps you kind of level up in that way. I always walk away from him feeling inspired. Like, I heard feedback, but coincidentally that weekend I had been at one of like my high school best friend's bachelor parties, and literally what happened during that time, totally organically, was people would take me on a walk and tell me about what was going on in their business or career, and they would like get advice from me, and they're like, oh, Pujji, like, I'm so glad, dude, like, you helped me soup up my business now, like, and like, part of that, like, tying that is like, it sort of just hit me. I said, the one thing I can't not do is try to help others through like help them learn and grow and be better, and business and entrepreneurship is the canvas around that. And so I kind of said some version of that. I said, I like to help people be at their best, and whatever that means. And I think the conduit for me is business and entrepreneurship. And I wrote it down, and it really started to kind of grow inside of me. I felt it being like a very real thing for me. Um, and yeah, and then it's like, now it's become a good touchstone for me, which is kind of like, by the way, I'd be surprised if I spend 50% of my time in that context. So I'm still, it's still a work in progress, but it's a touchstone for like, if I see something goes wrong in the business, numbers don't look great, losing a customer, whatever the different things that I do in business, and they're not like, I'm like, wait, is that how I'm relating to this? Am I relating through the lens of my purpose? Like, oh no, I'm not. And like, okay, well, what would it look like if I was? And it just become a touchstone for me to use as a way to kind of be more powerful and be more present. And the other thing that, the other thing, just to finish the story of Dave and just doing this, sort of uncovered that. And he's like, so what do you do in the morning, Jesse? And like, what's the first thing you look at for your business? And I go, I like look at the dashboards of like the numbers, like how much money did we make? Like, how are we trending on our plan? He goes, do you think you do that from a place of that purpose or something else? And I go, oh, well, then of course I do it out of fear that like something's going to go wrong or not be successful. Or I'm like, and we talked about this, and I've done versions of it. It's not habitual just yet, but like, he's like, what would your to-do list look like if you lived in your purpose? It's like, oh, I'd look at my calendar, I'd see who I'm meeting that day. I'd say, how can I make that, like, help that person be the best version of themselves using business and entrepreneurship? And that would be how I'd plan and run my day. And he was like, can you just see how like powerful that might make? Like, you'd be like amazing business leader if that's how you operate. And I bet you the numbers would take care of themselves in that situation. And it was and has been continued, again, a touchstone of a very powerful moment that I've noticed. Like, I've noticed lots of good things, or lots of just positivity that's come from that orientation.
You joked before that you might not spend 50% of your time in that zone. And I'm curious what you think you could do to spend a little bit more time there.
Yeah, that's a great question. One, and it's very like, so I was at this event this past week, and one of the it was like a business conference called Capital Camp, but they also had really fun events. So one of the events was meeting with like Navy SEALs who were going to teach you how to shoot and like do all this cool stuff. And so we met with this guy, and he was really awesome. He opened our eyes up in a lot of different ways. One of the things he said, I wrote it down, and it's kind of an answer to your question, is he was talking a lot about, and he doesn't know conscious leadership, but he knows humans, and he's, he knows humans in a deeper way in many ways than most of us do. And, he said, he was talking about survival and things to do if someone attacks you on the street, whatever. And he goes, oftentimes your ego and your reaction is like, that person can't do that to me. They can't talk to me that way. And you want to like teach them a lesson. And he was giving examples of, he's like a Navy trained sailor. He goes, I've gotten into fights with people who I thought, and they beat me up. Like, and so he's like, so what he said, which was really interesting, is he goes like, don't forget your mission priorities. And he said, he's like, write your mission priorities down in the morning and review them every morning. And again, in his case, he's like, my number one mission priority is to keep my kids alive. My number two is to keep myself alive so that I can raise good kids. Like, he had these and he goes, in that moment, if I like, my mission priority is to keep my kids and myself alive. Like, I'm not gonna, if my ego takes over, and my application of myself on that was like, oh, well, what are my mission priorities? They're to help others learn and grow. So it's like, what I actually wrote down to myself was, I actually want to start doing what he suggested, which is like kind of every day writing down, like, what are my mission priorities, and just reviewing them, like along with my journal, like my little journal I'll write every morning. Just also spending a minute just going, oh yeah, that's what's important. Like, I'm literally reminding myself in the same way, kind of the index card thing. That's what's important today. Okay, I'm gonna show up that way today. And I think, again, left to sort of my natural survival instincts, looking at dashboards, looking at numbers, reacting to that, firing off messages to people. Why does this look like this? And it's just a very different way of being, with like limited results. I think there are some results, but again, I think they get a ceiling on them very fast.
It's so fascinating because when you write down obvious things that you know to be true, it actually makes you better, which is odd, because you're like, I know that. I know my number one mission is to make my kids happy and safe, and I know my number two mission is to make myself safe, and we forget it if we don't write it down. Is there anything else that you've written down that has come true or that has helped you, even though it might be obvious?
Yeah, there was when I started Gateway X earlier this year in January. Like, I spent most of the back half of last year. I transitioned out of the day-to-day of the first company I started, Ampush, moved to St. Louis, which has kind of resettled my family here. And I generally was kind of going in circles around what to do next. And a lot of it was because I was looking at it through the lens of which outcome would be more successful. Like, it was a very outcome view. And I came across this quote. I don't know where I came across it, but I made it like the background of my screensaver and stuff on my computer. And I might butcher it, but it's something along the lines of, we become what we want by being what we want to become every day. And so it sort of took away this, like, I was like, oh, I want to be this like business leader who's like, I'm a billionaire. I have all these holdings. I have all these smart people working for me. And I'm like, and I kept being like, how do I solve for that? How do I solve for that? How do I get that? And that was not, and then it was like, oh no, like, whatever I want to be, I'm going to show up like that every day. So we become what we want to be by being what we want to become. And so it really was a good kickstart. It put me into gear around the new thing I started, which was like, okay, like I'm just going to show up tomorrow and I'm going to do the things I'm going to be the person that I think I could become one day. How would that person run meetings? How would that person recruit people? How would that person inspire? How would that, and that's felt very reinforcing. That's been another good this year's quote.
In previous versions of my own life, I've done things because I wanted to be someone else. I want to be this person, so I'm going to take those actions. I want to be that person. But when I started to go inward and listen to myself, I started to do things, and then it didn't matter who was the person that I was trying to be. Does that resonate or make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think it's you become yourself, right? And it's also like I think there's a liberation for me, at least again in this year. Like I was going through like the more specifics were like, oh, maybe people tell me I should start a venture fund and be this entrepreneurial investor guy, and then other people tell me I should just pick one business idea and try to run. And I want to do this kind of like venture studio incubator thing. And when I just liberated myself by being like, you know what, like I don't know if this will be successful. Like I really don't. But it's kind of the thing I want to be every day. It's kind of what I want to try to do. And then it like, like, as you said, it's led me down a bunch of interesting paths, and I've stopped caring as much if it will be successful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So take me through why you decided to start up on Twitter and spread your voice on Twitter. I assume it had something to do with your why and your purpose, but what was the reasoning behind, I'm going to start building a following or connecting with individuals on Twitter?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was like in the list of ways I could. A lot of what I'm doing now, I've designed somewhat sort of work backwards. Even the idea of launching a venture studio was somewhat rooted in this idea of like, what could be the job that would let me live my why the most frequently, and like, and to take it a little bit deeper, like my zones of genius, or at least the ones I feel like I've identified so far, are, I love this, like the first 6 to 12 months of like spotting an opportunity. Like I actually love the first week, frankly, of just like, oh my God, I have an idea, an opportunity. What are all the pieces that would take to get that to work and put together? But like generally the first 6 to 12 months, if you want to see me stay up all night doing something, that's the thing I would stay up all night doing, right? The second one is coaching and teaching people. Like I love like if I wasn't an entrepreneur, I'd probably be a professor. Hopefully I will still be some kind of a professor one day, but like I really love that moment. I was a TA in college. Like it's a place I keep going back to. And then like I love relationships in the sense of like, I like deals actually, and the reason I like deals is because it's crazy to me that two random people can meet each other and find a way to create a lot of value together. Like that I find to be really cool, and I feel like the amount of learning that happens is really compelling. And so those three things, right? It's like ideation, teaching, relationships. I was like, what platform would let me do that? And the most, and I was like, well, venture studio, or like something that involves starting things and hiring, coaching and teaching people. And so I designed backwards from there and said, that's kind of what I want to be doing. And I want to live that way. And then, the Twitter thing, I think, was kind of the spiritual side of it, was like more of a question, which is like, I wonder if there's any value in what I'm, like, could I share my value? Is there a way to share that? And could I inspire people that way? I have a particular penchant for bootstrapping just because it's like, I don't know. I've always thought it was interesting and a cool way of doing things. And I think it's like a mindset that a lot of people benefit from. It's not as in the lexicon as I wish it were relative to venture. And I have no problem with venture. I want both of them there. And then I also, generally speaking, for talent, for building, for, commercial opportunities, for deals, like so there was a more tactical side of it. The less where I was like, this could bring me great people and great opportunities. And so it's kind of that was the reasoning behind it. And I said, let's give it a shot and let's try it.
Was there anyone who pushed you to do it, or did you just kind of say, this looks cool?
Yeah, there was a bunch of people like, Patrick O'Shaughnessy obviously knows a lot about it. He's like, oh, it's a great tool. It's a great way to connect with people. You love people. A couple other friends had suggested like I was under leveraging I did a ton of public speaking in high school and other places, and I'm, a good storyteller. They're like, you're just under leveraging this talent of yours, this genius of yours. Get it out there and start doing stuff with it. The podcasting thing, like I thought it was just a cool way of learning. It's like a 3 or 4 right? It's like I'm learning a lot. It's getting my name out there. I'm meeting cool people. Like it's just hitting a lot of those things. So that's been yeah. I had a lot of people who encouraged me it was an under leveraged part of me.
And one of the stories you shared on Twitter was about calling Mark Zuckerberg, and I can't have you here on this podcast without talking about that. So how did you call Mark Zuckerberg, and explain that story?
Yeah, part of the funny thing about that story is like if you put it in the context of when it was, it doesn't seem that crazy. It just seems crazy because he became Mark Zuckerberg. Because in 2005 he was just some kid he was some junior at Harvard, and I was a junior at Penn. It wasn't like um, but yeah, the short version of it is like, Facebook was in 10 colleges or 20 colleges. We were very entrepreneurial, and we were like, let's start a high school version of Facebook. And this kid, we were like unoriginal. We're like, what should we call it? Let's call it HS Facebook. And so we found who owns hsfacebook.com. We went on Who Is or whatever. And it was some other kid who was the same age as us at Columbia. And he was like, oh, I want 20 grand for it. We're like, we don't have 20 grand. We're college kids. We're like, don't worry about it. So we called the business thehighList.com. And it was actually cool. We built the whole thing. We launched it. We started to see all the same trends of virality. And we built it in a summer, like while having day jobs. It was a crazy summer. And we get to the end of the summer, and he pings us and goes, Mark Zuckerberg wants to buy HS Facebook. Apparently they're launching in high schools. And I mean, and now that I look back on it, tons of fear. Like the next 2 days we were paralyzed because we were like, oh my God, this thing we've been working on is not going to work. And we've just gotten to this mode of like, we have to figure out if it's true. Like, what if the guy is just BSing us to get us to buy his domain? And so we were, like, why don't you tell us, like, prove it. And he forwards us an email from him, and it's an email from Mark Zuckerberg with Mark Zuckerberg's cell number. And we forwarded, or like we see that and we go, okay, well, that seems pretty credible, but like we have to talk to him. We have to make sure that, and we have to, maybe his plan is different and it's not competitive with ours or whatever. And so then, like, just, I'm one of those types where I'm like not afraid to pick up the phone. Actually, I did telemarketing in high school, which was a great skill set of just like, I'm not afraid to pick up the phone and call someone. So it was a 917. I know that was the area code. I don't remember the rest of the number, but I should have kept it. But it was 917, something, and he picks up the phone. Hello. And I'm like, hey, Mark, like, and I wasn't totally clear about who I was, but I was like, hey, I'm like looking at this domain, or like I'm associated with it. Are you guys buying this? Are you going into high schools? And I just like sat silent for the next 45 minutes while he kind of outlined their whole strategy and most of what they did for the next 10 years. Like, we're going to start with high school, we're going to go to high schools, then workplaces, then locations. And like, this is how we think we can build it. It's like, he just went through the whole thing. But yeah, that was, what was that? The summer of 2005.
What
A long time ago.
what were the lessons you took from that story in general and about Mark Zuckerberg?
Yeah, I mean, like the biggest story was, or the biggest lesson for it was like, we sort of threw in the towel after that, and I think there was like another company called My Yearbook. There was a few, like, people had success with it, and we sort of, I think we let the fear overwhelm us. We sort of just threw in the towel and said, "Fuck it, let's go find jobs." And I think, like, if I could go back and talk to myself at that time, I said, "Hey, you built something. You've done something very real. Like, find a way to turn it into something more interesting, or create your own version of what you want to build." Or like, maybe we could have talked to him and like, I don't know, if I was him and these 3 kids who were my age were like, hey, we built something already, maybe he would have hired us. I don't know. Like, we didn't take it anywhere from there in any meaningful way. And so, our reaction to like the adversity was left something to be desired. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
um,
that makes sense. I would love to talk about just advice for someone pursuing their highest version, and whether that be mentally, physically, spiritually. I'm curious, based on all this time you've gone inward, all this time you've evaluated yourself, and I'm curious if you have any insights on someone pursuing their highest version, advice for that person.
yeah. I think that, like, probably have a bunch of stuff. I mean, I think like don't be afraid to articulate what you really want, like today and in 10 years. And I used to be afraid of saying stuff like I want to make money and I want to be this and like there's certain things I was like, oh, I shouldn't say that. And I was like, no, just say what you really want. Like be as true to yourself as you can with what you want to go pursue, and don't, and that kind of leads to the second one, which is like, man, be kind to yourself. Like just stop judging yourself, like just be nice to yourself and compassionate with yourself. Um, because like it's not I had a funny moment last summer. That's also worth a quick story, which was like I just found myself a little bit frustrated consistently for a period of a few weeks, and was talking to my coach, and he's like, did you think you were going to do this work for a few years and then just be like a perfect conscious? And I was like, and he asked me that, and in that moment I was like, yeah, I did. Like he nailed it. I was like, oh, I thought that I would do this for a few years and I'm like good to go, right? Like I learned how to play tennis now and I can play tennis. And he was and it was like the work is sort of continual. It's a daily thing. And so I think getting used to that, like being kind to yourself and just being patient with yourself as you go through life and you make those mistakes and kind of go through it. And the third one would be like, do your best to set aside time for some form of regular reflection. Because I think, that just helps a lot of those ways, like build the habits in for that stuff. Um, the more you feel a feeling, the more curious you get about why you may be feeling that feeling. When you get really mad about something or really sad about something, just like really get curious as to what might be behind that. Yeah, those are probably some of the ones that come off the top of my head.
So beautifully said. And this is an episode and conversation that I'm personally going to revisit so I can take some notes. Thank you, Jesse, for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it. And where can people connect with you further?
Yeah, I mean, Twitter's as great as anything. So my DMs are open, like follow there. And I try my best to either interact and be helpful. Most of the time, it's tough for me always to get on a call because of my schedule and stuff, but I try my best. And in general, like I think some of the threads I've written up, and I'll probably throw up a website with some of the threads now because they're getting lost in the Twitter stuff, but like the upper limit problem thread and some of these other things that I feel like are good resources that have made some of the things I've done and learned a little bit more approachable than picking up a book or going to a seminar or something like that, which is oftentimes the way, people feel like they have to go do them.
Yeah, and the upper limit problem will link below because that is such a great idea that people should have in their head. So thank you, Jesse, for taking their time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Danny. It was great to meet.